There's a lot of reasons why it's important to detoxify. I mean, we hear the catchphrases cleanse, detoxification, that sort of thing. I like to use the word detoxify because we are living in a world where, we are bombarded with, just through daily living, even if we're living relatively clean lifestyles, every year there are thousands of different types of chemicals released into the atmosphere in the United States that, come up into Canada that we don't know much about. So the burden is increasing, right? People's diets are shifting, have shifted away from really micronutrient dense diets, the diets that are pretty lacking in terms of micronutrients. So more wheat-based, sugar-based, soy-based type foods. So our body's not getting the fuel it needs to actually work normally, work in proper physiology. So that burden just keeps kind of piling up like silt, essentially, right? So we want to give our body the opportunity to decrease that toxic burden. Basically, you just want to keep that balance in mind, because we are taking on toxic burden from whatever chemicals, pesticides, PCBs, all that sort of stuff. But we want to make sure that our capacity to eliminate is greater, at least equal to, but greater than our intake of those toxins. So that's why it's important. And it's important for everyone. And we're seeing a lot more epidemiological links between things like diabetes and organic compounds, pesticides, that sort of thing. Are we seeing direct links in the studies? No, but we're seeing a lot of epidemiological links there that show us, we're starting to see hormone issues, insulin resistance, obesity. All these really can be linked to environmental toxicity. So if you're just an average Joe who wants to stay healthy, it's important. But if you are suffering from chronic illness such as diabetes, heart disease, cancer, it really becomes even more poignant and important to do. Some of the symptoms of toxicity, these are generalized symptoms and they can be quite vague, and it'd be a spectrum of symptoms. But anything from foggy thinking to joint pain to persistent headaches, sinusitis, even mood disorder. If you're the type of person who, if you step into an elevator with somebody wearing perfume and you get a headache and you feel really ill, that's a sure sign that you've got issues, at least with your liver's ability to eliminate. And if you have issues with your liver's ability to eliminate, then you've likely got a toxic burden going on. Neurological symptoms, things like autism spectrum disorder, for example. We look at, heavy metals can be a component there. I don't know if I already mentioned this, but sort of that picture, that fibromyalgia type picture, that's again a bit of a spectrum diagnosis, right? Muscle pain, mood issues, joint pain, that sort of thing. Yeah. Any type of real chronic issue is likely toxicity is playing a contributing factor. How big that factor is really depends on your genetic component. And that's a huge thing about toxicity, right? Why does one person smoke 50 packs of cigarettes a month and live to 90, and another person who's, raw, vegan, vegetarian, die at 42, right? We all have different capacities to eliminate. We all eliminate in different ways. Some of us are really good at it. Some of us hold on to our toxicity, and that affects our tissues and our organs in a variety of ways. And essentially, when we aren't detoxifying, we are basically increasing the chance that any genetic predispositions that we have, those switches will be turned on, right? That's why proper nutrition is so important, because we can really mitigate that epigenetic component of toxicity, right? So just because, mom, dad, aunt and uncle, and brother and sister all had cancer does not necessarily mean you are a shoo-in for cancer. I mean, you can make changes to keep those genetic switches off. And that is, keeping your toxicity down, doing your 2 times a year detoxification programs, doing your, changing your lifestyle, eating more healthy, more plant-based diets, that sort of stuff.
More frequently?
Right, so in terms of timing, spring is a good time for sure. on a couple of fronts. If you look at the traditional Chinese medical model, they look at pairing different seasons with different organ systems, right? So, for example, the lung and the large intestine are paired as a yin and yang organ, and they're relative to the fall, right? So we see people get the flu, upper respiratory tract infections, those sorts of things. In the spring, Chinese medicine is associated with liver, gallbladder, and those organs being paired. And you can look at it physiologically too. It makes sense, not just from that energetic Chinese perspective, but from the perspective of, we've been sitting around all winter a little bit more sluggish. Maybe we've packed on some pounds. We've been eating denser foods, less fresh fruits and vegetables. And then spring comes along, we start to get out on the bike, start to become a little bit more active, and our metabolism starts to shift a little bit. And what has to compensate for that shift in metabolism is our liver. And when we talk about toxins, we store our toxicity in our fat cells. So once we start to get things moving, our liver has to really pick up its game. But the thing with the liver is that it does tend to stagnate. So we really want to give it support in that transition time of spring, because it is getting that extra burden, and we want to give it a helping hand, essentially. In terms of when spring comes along, if you're looking just to do a preventative detoxification thing, and I would recommend doing one in the spring, one in the fall, right? Those are two key transition times, at least where we live, right? In terms of spring, really it would involve using foods that are maybe a little bit more on the bitter side, things like dandelion, putting dandelion in your salad, for example, starting to really get those leafy greens going. Some of the juicing type stuff that you were doing, things along those lines. Lemon water in the morning, for example, can really help get both phases of liver detoxification moving. There's lots that you can do in that regard, right? A lot of it has to also do with just avoiding certain things. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to put a whole bunch of stuff into your system to clean up. It's more like, we'll give your body a break, right? Take a break from the alcohol, the caffeine, and the sugar. And for those first couple of days, you're going to feel not so hot, especially if you're the coffee drinker. But then you'll start to notice, just from avoiding those things, that you're taking the burden off the body. And the body is strong. It has an innate drive to work towards its own normal physiology and getting rid of these things. So simply by taking a break is great. Some of the programs that I will look at using, and it really depends, it's all individualized, right? And that's what naturopathic medicine is about, individualized medicine. So with some people, if it's really just a basic detox protocol, I might use some homeopathic remedies. But what I use a lot of with people in that sort of situation is different herbal teas, things like nettle, dandelion, those would be two of the main ones, alfalfa, those sorts of things that are really full of micronutrients that are giving the body the fuel it needs to do its job, right? And that's that whole idea of what we would call functional medicine, right? So functional medicine meaning just trying to give the body what it needs to function with normal physiology, right? So, yeah, herbal teas, avoiding, those potent things like sugar, caffeine, alcohol, that sort of stuff. So if someone's considering doing some sort of detoxification protocol or program, I always recommend that they consult somebody, be it a naturopathic doctor or a holistic practitioner, whoever they feel comfortable working with and that is qualified in that manner, and just to give them an assessment of where they're at. For me, for example, I would take a full case history and intake and get a pretty good idea from that perspective of what someone's toxic burden might be. I would look at their occupational exposures, for example. If it's a car mechanic, then we can run certain measures to measure what his exposures to solvents are, for example. And that would really tweak what formulas I might use from a protein powder perspective, what herbs I might want to use, what other herbal formulas I might want to use that are a little bit more indicated for that type of exposure versus a heavy metal, for example. So those are sort of things that you want to be able to suss out, because when you look at the signs and symptoms of toxicity, it's kind of like is sort of that really difficult case for a general practitioner to deal with, because it's someone coming in with muscle aches, anxiety, extreme sensitivities to odor, fibromyalgia, obesity, a whole gamut of things that are more of a spectrum of issues, right, that become a bit vague. So to just go do a detoxification protocol that is very general can be helpful, but it can also be detrimental if your system's not ready for it. So for example, like the juice fast that you went away on for 4 days can be really good for people, right? Because it takes you away, it resets you, it gives you new tools to take home into your daily life. You get to see firsthand how you feel when you're detoxifying or taking a break. But if you're at a certain stage where your kidney function might be compromised, or your liver function is compromised, or to a pathological degree, or even just the degree where it's sluggish, if you mobilize all those toxins and your body's not ready to handle them, you're essentially just going to feel crappy and then not get rid of them and redistribute them into your body, right? You're just going to mobilize them. So a lot of what I would do is prep work to get people to a point where they can do something a little bit more intensive, like a juice fast. So if you're looking to do a juice fast, you want to make sure kidney function's there, liver function's there. What are your electrolytes like? That sort of stuff. People can expect to probably feel, from what I see consistently, feel pretty crappy for the first day, 2, 3. They feel a little bit headachy, lethargic, fatigued, that sort of thing. But when you're talking from day 5 to 7 or so, you really start to see a shift in people. Energy starts to increase, start to drop a couple of pounds perhaps. Maybe the skin clears up, fogginess shifts, cravings start to subside a little bit, mood lightens, and by the end of a typical 3-week protocol, you'll often see a progression of all those things I just mentioned: weight loss, improved mood. If there's an issue with joint pain, for example, you can see improvement there. So the whole gamut, really. But it really depends on what your presenting symptoms are, what your toxic burden really is, and how hard you have to work at lessening that burden.